Today, Sarah Hanson-Young led the Senate inquiry into media diversity and summoned Global News Corp CEO Robert Thomson to answer some questions. Again, as with every hearing of this farcical inquiry, Young demonstrated that she had absolutely no idea what media diversity was or how she would define it. Here she is arguing that News Corp Australia's recent net zero campaign, being splashed across a number of newspapers, demonstrated a lack of media diversity.
It's definitely well organised. I mean, some of the headlines and the photos were all the same, let alone the content inside. I'm just wondering how that marries with media diversity. And if every newspaper in the country, out of the most concentrated media newspaper market in the world, carries the first 16 pages all the same, doesn't seem much space for diversity there, does it?
Well, Senator, I would contest your definition of diversity. Clearly, about 20% of people now rely on newspapers for news, 80% don't. I think it's about 65% of people read their mobile phones for news. Is that 65% going to be 80% in 2 years' time? There's a vast amount of diversity in Australia.
As Robert Thomson points out, you need to clearly define media diversity if you wish to criticise it or regulate it. If you think focusing arbitrarily on one medium, newspapers, is representative of aggregate media diversity, you are grossly unqualified to lead an inquiry into the issue. The overwhelming majority of media consumption in today's age occurs digitally. And this year, the University of Canberra released its 2021 Digital News Report, which gives insight into the reality of media diversity. Now, this dotted line represents the views of mainstream Australians, which you can see skynews.com.au is closer to than any other brand in Australia. What this graphic shows is how the average reader of those titles votes. And there does exist a dramatic ideological oversaturation, but it's to the far radical left of the spectrum. And that, as far as I'm concerned, is perfectly fine and reasonable. If you want to go and read The Guardian, Crikey, or The Conversation for the heavily left-wing coverage, that's fine. There is a place for everyone, because Sarah Hanson-Young, that's how the internet works. There are very few barriers preventing content creators from entering the sphere and that content then being consumed. And Chris, I want to go to you with this one because for me, the most fascinating aspect of today's inquiry was that Sarah Hanson-Young was upset that News Corp was now advocating for action against climate change. I mean, you would think that she would be pleased that there was widespread agreement in the papers.
Talk about leading with her chin. It just goes to show, again, this lack of intellectual integrity in any of these arguments. The point here is she points to a campaign run by News Limited tabloids on net zero. And sure, a lot of that coverage there she would agree with, she would like, the ABC would agree with. But the point about diversity and a little bit of the contest of ideas is that people like me have written and argued a contrary point of view. So does Andrew Bolt, so do other people in those newspapers. It's not just that one size fits all. It's not groupthink. There is a discussion of this idea from myriad positions within News Corp, whether it's television, newspapers, online and all the rest of it. At the ABC, where the taxpayers funded it, it's supposed to have a plurality of ideas and a diversity of ideas and supposed to have these issues covered from different perspectives and with objectivity. They all run the one line. They all run an extreme climate alarmist green left line, and there is no diversity in their thinking at the ABC. So she really led with her chin. And just on this, I've got a documentary coming up on Monday night where I take a look at the net zero energy challenge and run the argument backed by a lot of expert opinion that you cannot get to net zero in Australia or globally without using nuclear power. Now, ask yourselves how often you've seen that argument run at the ABC. They love to talk about net zero and renewables and storage and all sorts of crackpot schemes, but they won't confront the obvious issue of nuclear power and how we're going to expand that around the world or in Australia.
Yeah, Sophie, it's such a good issue. It's such a complex issue, and surely what we need is more diversity of thought. And what I take away from these inquiries and the questions that Sarah Hanson-Young is putting forward, it seems to be more about punishing organisations which have a reader base of people that don't vote for her than it is actually about genuinely assessing media diversity and the influences of social media giants.
Well, Jack, the media diversity hearings that have happened this year are anything but looking at media diversity, given that there's been no representatives from Channel 7, nor 10, nor the ABC, nor SBS. It's been very News Corp heavy. There was one executive from 9. It's not looking across the entire board. It's focusing on News Corp because effectively those running this hearing don't like News Corp. And that is not about media diversity. This is about politics, and it's disappointing. I mean, this should be looking at the whole landscape, not just a section of the landscape that Senator Hanson-Young and her colleagues, should I say, don't like.
Yeah, it's also really disappointing. And Chris, I'd actually like to hear your thoughts on this as well. It's dangerous when politicians are setting this up. They're leaking to organisations like The Guardian, which are hostile and have a commercial imperative to be, have an advantage over other organisations. They're politicians. They serve us, and they're trying to shut down legitimate debate.
Well, essentially, Jack, they want to shut down opinions that they disagree with. They only want one political ideology in the marketplace, and they want that one pushed by the ABC, funded by taxpayers, and by The Guardian Australia, which you'll remember was instigated by Malcolm Turnbull, and he helped choose the political reporters and editor of The Guardian. That's why Paul Murray calls it the Turnbull Times. They just want one school of thought. They don't want a diversity of ideas at all. So this whole inquiry is a misnomer. They actually want to hunt out of existence any mainstream media, any media that considers right-of-centre points of view as being legitimate. And I find that frightening. And while we might think it's a bit far-fetched that they'll have any success, we ought to fight it every day, because you can never, ever underestimate their diligence in trying to get rid of alternative points of view.
Yeah, I agree. It is frightening.